Thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction and for your tremendous support of this civility series. And also the other co-sponsors, the Ferguson Library, the Hearst Media Group in Connecticut, and a special thanks to the librarian, Alice Knapp. You know, libraries are very, very special places. It's really where, you know, my major transformation occurred, going from the bottom of the class to the top of the class, reading books. We were very poor, but between the covers of those books, I could go any place, I could be anybody, I could do anything. And I began to read about incredible people in all kinds of fields who accomplished so much. And I began to recognize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. So, you know, I stopped listening so much to all the people who were saying what you couldn't do and why you couldn't do it. And it was the library, really, where that occurred. Now, when I got the invitation to be one of your speakers, I knew I had to come because I spent so much time talking about the need for civil discourse in our society. And frequently in my public speeches, I remind people, as Jesus said, and later echoed by Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Never has stood, never will stand. And when people begin to hate each other and to divide themselves, there is no good place that it ever leads to. And we must be careful as a society. It's okay to disagree with people. I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. But to realize that there are those out there who are driving wedges between every demographic, race, income, religion, gender, politics, you name it, driving wedges, telling you that you're supposed to hate these people. And, you know, I often like to use the symbol of our country, the American, the bald eagle. I mean, so majestically flying over the hills and the valleys, beautifully soaring, master of the air. But why can it do that? Because it has two wings, a left wing and a right wing. Couldn't do it with two left wings, couldn't do it with two right wings. So what does that mean for us? It means that if we work together, there's a whole lot more that we can accomplish. But, you know, great nations like Rome, they failed, not because they were weak. They had no external enemies who could overcome them. But they destroyed themselves from within and made themselves easy prey for the barbarians. Something that we must learn from. In a couple of my books, America the Beautiful and One Nation, I discuss how we need to rediscover what made this nation what it was. What are the good things about America? What are the things that we need to learn from so that we don't repeat them again? The bedrock principles like the Constitution that have guided this country for hundreds of years. And it's up to all of us, the people of this nation, not Democrats, not Republicans, not independents, to reject the voices of division and hatred that have cropped up, and to believe that the strength of our nation lies in our democratic values and our civility one to another. You know, where people care about their neighbors, have a strong sense of community, and a well-defined vision of America as a land of opportunity, justice, and freedom for all. That's where our strength comes from. Think about the early days in this nation, when we had communities that were isolated from each other, sometimes 50 or 100 or 200 miles before you got to another community, and yet they thrived and they grew. Why? because people cared about each other. You know, if it was harvest time and Mr. Jones was up in an apple tree picking apples and he fell out and broke his leg, guess what? Everybody else harvested his crops for him. They didn't say, what were you doing up in that tree? No, they just harvested his crops for him. People cared about each other. Something we need to start thinking about again. You know, where we respectfully disagree, let's find common ground, uphold positive role models, seek our moral ground on time-established Judeo-Christian values. Now, of course, democracy was never intended as a spectator sport. Political bickering, demeaning taunts were standard political behavior in this country since its founding. I mean, just look at Alexander Hamilton, who could only settle his differences with Aaron Burr with a pistol duel. And we all know how that worked out. You know, the deep divisions along political lines are nothing new. What is new is the deepening and sometimes hostile divisions between those on opposing sides of social and economic issues. For instance, among those who believe in personal responsibility and those who seek further government dependency. All of this, along with the huge electoral swings to the political left and right, are ultimately helping to disrupt the unity and civility in our nation. And I want to just emphasize how important it is for us to concentrate on the things we do agree about and work on those and solve the problems. Because what we started doing is just lurching from left to right, not making any forward progress. And that is destructive in the long run, with cyber extremists and media pundits only adding fire to the disunity. Is it any wonder that our disagreements have taken a hostile edge, drowning out respect, politeness, and empathy? And let me add that incivility can also often be found in the workplace, even in hospitals. Many people think the operating room as an oasis of calm, peace. I can tell you, as the former director of pediatric neurosurgery at Hopkins, there were places where it was not peaceful. There were surgeons who were so full of themselves they would yell and holler at people, throw instruments. They weren't happy unless people were crying. I mean, I thought it was just absurd. But even as a successful neurosurgeon, I often found myself mopping the floor in between cases, helping get the room ready. Now, you know, they didn't like it. And they would come and they would say, no, doctor, let me do this. But it got the room clean real quick, I gotta tell you. But I always wanted to listen to what people said. I was not one of those surgeons that said, you shut up, you know, when I hear you speak when I speak to you. Because I'll tell you what, people notice things. And when they see things and they feel free to talk to you about them, it only improves the results for everybody. So regardless of their job title, no one in the operating room was undervalued or overlooked, and it made a huge difference in the outcomes. Now, interestingly enough, if we look around, there are really plenty of good people everywhere, from all walks of life, helping to build and unify communities. And there's Angela King, founder of a group called Life After Hate, who made the journey from being a neo-Nazi to advocating harmony within diversity. Daryl Davis, an African-American musician and book author, he authored the book, A Black Man's Odyssey in the Ku Klux Klan. And he reached out to members of the KKK, befriended them, helped turn them from their hatred. These are just two of tens of thousands of ordinary people helping to bring civility back to the dialogue. And as the Secretary of HUD, one of my jobs is to further the civil dialogue, how to best serve families in our care on assisted housing, among many other things. And of course, some of you have seen the headlines in the media regarding what we're trying to accomplish at HUD. We are, to quote, declaring war on the poor by our policies and initiatives. What a bunch of crap. We are totally committed to fair housing and helping people in assisted housing and families graduate out of dependency to a better life of self-sufficiency and self-respect. Unfortunately, having a civil discourse on this issue is getting harder by the day. And what we're doing at HUD is declaring war on poor management. We are trustees of some of America's most vulnerable families, and taxpayers' money. Both have been seriously mismanaged in the past. Fortunately, a couple of months ago, we finally got a CFO after many months of political wrangling. He was 37 years at Ernst & Young, a tremendous mind. And he came in and he looked at the books and he was ready to run out the door, but we restrained him. And, we're in a process of really transitioning from a gigantic inefficient bureaucracy to a business model that will actually be able to respond to the needs of people. And that's what we were doing earlier today, dealing with the crumbling foundations situation. It's awful. And through no fault of their own, people wind up losing the value of the most important financial thing in their lives. And obviously the solution does not lie in one area. But that's why we have a federal, a state, and a local government, as well as local nonprofits, other kinds of groups. When we begin to work together, including reaching out to the insurance companies, there would be a responsibility too, and we all start thinking about our responsibility. And then you look at, the people in the housing development that was so poorly managed. We can't stand around and let people live in those kinds of conditions and just turn a blind eye to it. Too often you hear you should just leave things like they are, the status quo. Let tenants remain where they are without any hope of making a successful life out of assisted housing. This kind of indifference can be tempting, as it's much easier to look away from the lives of the poor. But the late Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, who I had the privilege of meeting, Nobel Prize winner, said, "It is troublesome to be involved in another person's despair. For the person who is indifferent to his or her neighbors, there's no consequence." How can you build or remain a civil society based on such indifference? The despair of any of our families in assisted housing is our business, as well as our problem to solve. And we're moving forward to turn this situation around. At HUD, we're no longer measuring success by how many people are in a program or are in a housing project, but by how many graduate out of that and becomes independent. That's what makes our country strong. Our most precious resource are our people. We only have 330 million. That's a quarter of what India and China have. We need to develop our people if we're going to be able to compete into the future. And we have to have respect for them, and we have to care for them. As a demonstration of our commitment to the families we serve, to empower Americans to become self-sufficient, HUD is launching the first 3 Envision Center demonstration sites in Detroit and surrounding areas later this week. This is an important step forward for families trapped in dependency and lack of economic opportunity. It has been said that where there is no vision, there is no hope. Helen Keller said, "I would rather be without sight than without vision." So Envision Centers are specifically designed to help HUD-assisted households get the tools and services they need to plan for a future outside of public assistance. What is an Envision Center? It comes from the Bible. Proverbs 29:18 says, "Without a vision, the people perish." So we started calling them vision centers, but then we figured everybody would think they were getting glasses. So we called them Envision Centers. But, it's a centralized hub in or near assisted housing developments that are especially designed to provide one-stop shopping for all of our tenants and their families' needs. Whether that be GED classes, prenatal wellness visits by healthcare professionals, youth mentoring, enhanced searches for Section 3 job opportunities, a whole host of things. But what it really is a substitute. People who grow up in well-heeled families, who have a nurturing extended family and a nurturing community, they don't need these things. But people who don't have them have a very different trajectory in their lives. And that's what we must think about, a holistic approach to mitigating poverty, helping people not only gain economic independence, but self-respect as well. Of course, helping people grow out of poverty is not just the responsibility of the government. Our values, principles, beliefs also inform us that it's responsibility of all of us to lend a helping hand. And that's why the centers will partner with a wide range of federal agencies, nonprofits, private companies, community and faith-based groups, all to provide a full range of necessary services. At the end of the day, the Bible and our civic culture leads us toward the cultivation of an open heart and to act on the benefit of others. This is a culture that is worth protecting and instilling in every new generation. Together, we can restore civility to this great nation. And I'd like to end by asking us to all take the niceness pledge. Just raise your hand wherever you are. Everybody have your hand up. If the person next to you doesn't have your hand up, you may kick them. Okay? Because after this, you have to be nice, okay? Now, what did you just pledge to do? To be nice. You can put your hands down. To everybody you encounter for 1 week, okay? Now, that means no talking about other people behind their back for a week. I know some people will stroke out. It means you see somebody struggling, you're going to help them. Men, it means you're going to hold the chairs for the lady, open the doors for the ladies. Ladies, it means you're not going to curse them out when they do that. You get to the elevator, there's only one spot left. You're going to let somebody else get on. And when you're on the elevator, you're not going to act like you never saw the numbers change before. Speak to people. You might have to practice CPR, but speak to people. You're going to get your car in the parking lot. It is jam-packed. 3 people are following you in their car because they want your space. When you get in the car, you're not going to open the glove box and pull down the mirror. Just get out of the space and let me. You don't have to revel in your power. But what are you doing during that week? Thinking about others first. What kind of a community? What kind of a state? What kind of a nation? What kind of a world could we have if we could just do that? And we can. Thank you.
front row. We've asked for questions for Dr. Carson. In the interest of time, we've got 5 questions here. At the end of this, we're going to ask, thanks to the security people, that everybody in the room give Dr. Carson the opportunity to leave ahead of the crowd. So it'll give him a chance to get out of here without getting buttonholed by 307 people, but that's the goal. So let me ask the 5 questions and ask Dr. Carson to respond to them. The first one is, you have the opportunity to speak anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, on any platform, at any time. Why would you pick the Ferguson Library in this crowd?
Well, as I said before, I love libraries. It's really where I got my start. I was here today at the bequest of Senator Murphy and Blumenthal and Congressman Courtney to look into those issues. So what better other thing could you do than to come here and speak about one of my favorite topics, civility, and what we can do about it.
Well, we're really grateful you're here. The second question, the Fair Housing Act was signed into law 50 years ago. As we commemorate the anniversary, can you tell us how we're doing in terms of addressing housing discrimination?
Well, you know, obviously, there's still work to do. Have we made progress? Of course. You know, I think back to when I was in the 8th grade, and you know, in the 5th grade, I was the worst student in the class. 8th grade, I had ascended to the top, thanks to the library. But they gave a special award at the end of the year to the student with the top academic achievement. And you take your report card around to all the class, and the teacher would mark it. And I had all A's. And I was down to my last class, which was band. And but I was really good in band. I even subsequently was offered a scholarship to Interlock, and those in music know what that means. So I knew I was going to get an A there. The guy gave me a C to ruin my report card, so I wouldn't get the award because I was the only black student in the class. And to his chagrin, band didn't count. But you know, those kinds of things used to go on in our society, and particularly in the housing market. And HUD does an assessment of discrimination in housing every 10 years, and each one has gotten progressively better. But we clearly have more to do. Interestingly enough, the majority of discrimination cases now revolve around disabilities. 55% of them are disabilities. And more than half of those are secondary to service animals. You would be amazed what kind of animals people want to take. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But, you know, we have to obviously look at all these things very carefully. You know, we have been pursuing cases. All you have to do is look at the cases that we're pursuing. Those people who say we're backing off have no idea what they're talking about. But we're doing it in a very controlled and very legitimate way.
Mr. Secretary, as it stands now, it's very difficult to get landlords to accept Section 8 housing. Why are we cutting funding for Section 8 housing?
Well, actually, the Section 8 housing is going up. The funding for it has been plussed up in the budget. But the key thing about Section 8 housing is that it comes with a lot of regulatory burden. So the landlord, you know, if he can take somebody who's not a Section 8 voucher person and not have to jump through all these hoops, he'd rather do that. I understand that, and you know, I've asked all the people involved with Section 8 to work on removing those barriers. You know, we obviously want to have the rules and regulations in place that are necessary, but there's a lot of unnecessary stuff. And that really is throughout government. I mean, it really irks me because I don't like bureaucracy. And, you know, it's like there's a glass of water in front of you, and you want to take that glass of water, and they say, nope, first you have to do 180 degrees, walk out the door over there, walk down 5 flights of stairs, come back, climb through the window, and then come back, sit over here, and then do that 6 more times. You know, it's just ridiculous. And it's because people just pile one thing on top of the other rather than fixing it.
Mr. Secretary, how does it look for job training grants to be provided to the states for people who want to work?
Well, one of the things that we're really emphasizing right now is Section 3. Section 3 has been part of the Fair Housing Act. It's been on the books for 50 years. And it says if you're getting HUD money, you have an obligation to hire low-income people in the area or to train them or to provide them with contracts. People have found all kinds of ways around it. We're now fixing that and incentivizing them, you might say, to utilize it correctly. Because once you think about this, there are 6.5 million skilled jobs vacant right now in our country. People without skills to do them. We can train these people and give them a skill that is marketable, which allows them to ascend the ladder out of dependency. Another thing that we're looking at, self-sufficiency programs have been around for a long time, but the reason they really haven't had the impact is because as soon as someone starts climbing the ladder to self-sufficiency, we yank their support. Well, everybody else is looking at that and they say, I'm not climbing that ladder. So, you know, we have to obviously do things in a logical way. I think it will pay big dividends because most people, given the opportunity to gain some skills and to climb that ladder and realize the American dream, would much rather do that than to sit in a dependent position.
Mr. Secretary, it's been said that the number of separate problems contributing to people and families needing federal assisted housing is as broad as the Mississippi River. Where do we start tackling that issue? What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to start thinking logically. And we have to stop dividing ourselves, putting ourselves in our separate corners, and throwing hand grenades at each other. You know, this is called the United States of America, not the divided States of America. That's what we have to look at. And then we have to adopt the can-do attitude. And I got to tell you a story about a little girl who fell off a swing here in Connecticut, and she hit her head and had a seizure. And you know, they says post-traumatic seizure, no big deal, but then she had more and more and just kept having more seizures despite medications, despite consultations. Went and saw specialists in different places. Finally, someone in Boston said, I think she has Rasmussen's encephalitis. And the seizures will get worse and worse, no matter what you do. And eventually, you know, she'll become incapacitated and may die. And there's nothing you can do about it. The mother would not give up. She read about everything she could read about. Discovered some of the things we were doing at Hopkins, including an operation called hemispherectomy, take out half of the brain of the child. And make a long story short, they came for a consultation after hearing about the risk, you know, might be paralyzed, might die. They said, seizures are not that bad. So they came back to Connecticut, but she was in a play, had a seizure on stage. They brought her back, they wanted the operation. I did the operation, took out the left half of her brain. Everything went smoothly except for one thing, she didn't wake up at the end of the operation. She remained in a coma. A day, 2 days went by, her parents were beating themselves up. Why did they do this? You know, a couple of weeks went by. She used to love Mr. Rogers. They would play tapes of Mr. Rogers, didn't wake her up. Mr. Rogers heard about her. After 3 weeks, came to the hospital, to her bedside with his puppets to try to wake her up. Didn't wake her up. A whole month went by. It was in the middle of the night. Her dad was lying on a cot next to her bed. And she said, Daddy, my nose itches. And he was so shocked, he jumped up and ran out. She talked, only had on his underpants. Everybody came out to see what all the commotion was. And you know what? That was the beginning of a rapid recovery for that little girl. And in no time, she was walking, she was talking. It was time to go back to school. Nobody thought she could achieve at school. She was missing the left half of her brain. The part that lets you calculate, but that little girl worked so hard. She was so determined that the next semester, on a test, she had the highest score in her class in mathematics, and she did that with half of her brain. And that little girl is here tonight with her parents. If you stand up. And I always like to say, she can do all that with half a brain. What can you do with a whole brain? Thank you all very much.
We just have two more questions, and then we're going to ask the secretary to leave and leave all of us here. But first question is, Mr. Secretary, you indicated Helen Keller, Elie Wiesel as heroes, some people lesser known as heroes. Who are your other heroes? Who should we step up to and admire?
Well, you know, besides Jesus Christ, my mother. You know, my mother came from a huge family in rural Tennessee, got married at age 13, trying to escape all of that. They moved to Detroit. Some years later, she discovered that my father was a bigamist. I remember telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. Just kidding, just kidding. But, you know, she was determined that my brother and myself would be successful. She hadn't had a chance to get much education. Barely finished the 3rd grade, was illiterate, but she was a spy. She worked as a domestic, cleaning people's houses. She was spying on them. What makes these people so successful? And she realized that they didn't spend a lot of time watching TV and just wasting time, and they did a lot of reading, planning and strategizing. So she came home and imposed that on us. And we were not happy. I mean, if it were today's society, we would have called the social workers, and they would have taken her away in handcuffs. But those days you had to do what the parents said. So, but that made a tremendous difference. And no matter what people said to her or about her, she didn't care. She just wanted to make sure we were successful.
Last question, Mr. Secretary. You're a member of the cabinet. I don't think anybody in the room wants you to leave without saying something about President Trump. You can say anything you want to say. I'm convinced that there are people on one side or the other in the room, and nobody will attack you for anything you do say. But just tell us one thing you'd like to say about the president.
He's got a great sense of humor. And, he said to me, Ben, aren't you glad you didn't win?